Welcome to Inspiring Women with Laurie McGraw. I am your host, Laurie McGraw. I have spent the past 30 years in leadership, and over the years, I've come to learn one thing: women need women, and not just any women, but inspiring women. Tune in every week to hear from women at the pinnacle of their careers and from others who are just starting out. Episodes can be found at inspiringwomen.show or subscribe on your favorite podcast app. Thanks for listening, and I hope you will be inspired. This is Inspiring Women, and I am Laurie McGraw. Today, I am speaking with Anita Lynch. Anita is a board director. She's an advisor to many technology companies, and she is well known as someone who is deeply expert in the areas of technology and data. She was most recently the chief data officer at New Relic. That was a public company that provides data-driven enterprise software. And notably, she is one of the first African American women to serve in the C-suite role in these data areas. And so we're going to talk about that today. She also does quite a bit of volunteer work, whether it's playing leadership roles in her community programs or working with the Harvard Business School, which she is an alumni of, well decorated and recognized as an innovator and technology inventor. Native of Chicago, Anita is speaking to us from Oakland, California. Anita, thank you for being on Inspiring Women.
Thank you, Laurie. I'm so happy to be here with you guys today.
All right, well, let's get going. I always like to start Inspiring Women with what are you doing today professionally? What does day-to-day look like for you now as a board director and sort of no longer at New Relic, where you were the C-suite leader for a number of years?
Oh, that's an amazing question. Every day is different, and I'm so fortunate because I get to spend all of my time on things that are personal projects and career-related endeavors, but it's all, things that I personally find rewarding and fulfilling, and things I intentionally want to make a priority. So every day is different, but every week is kind of somewhat the same in the sense that I allocate a certain amount of time to my board preparation in terms of keeping up with current events. And also, occasionally I'll have meetings with leadership team members. I also advise some founders of startups. And so I talk with them on a weekly basis in some cases. I also have my own, kind of independent consulting that I've just started to do. And I'm looking at some educational endeavors like teaching in areas of technology and data in programming for executives that are interested in kind of being a better leader or a better board director, and sharing, some of those skills. And then I'm also doing a little bit of angel investing. And so I spend some of my time also, just evaluating markets and trying to predict the future like everyone else is, I guess, in today's macroeconomic climate.
Yeah, we're all trying to figure it out. But Anita, first of all, congratulations on being appointed to the board of NASDAQ US exchanges. I know that is a recent board appointment. That's a pretty premier one. So congratulations on that. What's great about what you're talking about is I really hear you talking about defining a next chapter of a whole number of things, whether it's investing or advising or serving on boards. So I want to talk about this next chapter. But before we dive into that, I'd love to get a bit of the background. Like, how did you get here? You've got degrees in economics, you're an expert in data and technology, certainly in the area of cloud and security. You went to Harvard Business School, so that means you're super smart. Now you're doing the board work. What's the bio sketch? How did you sort of, move along in this career journey? Give us a bit of that background.
Yeah, of course. I mean, when I coach people, or if folks are asking me these questions, I tell them, there's really two versions of my story. There's the version where, looking back in hindsight, it all sort of fits, nicely and neatly together. And it's very clear, sort of how the dots connected to lead me down this path, and I can sort of reverse engineer it. But, there's also the version of the story that is when you don't have the benefit of hindsight and you're trying to, make career decisions and navigate, the balance between work and personal life or other priorities that you may have at any given point in time. And you don't really know how things are going to turn out. So you just have to have the confidence to bet on yourself and to have that faith that, things are going to work out. For me, the source of that confidence and some of the decision-making frameworks that I benefited from, are really rooted in my family, particularly, we were talking a little bit earlier about role models. I have several women in my life that are amazing role models, including my aunt, Carol Goss, who was a CEO of a foundation and also is very active in board service as well. And, she, was the first Black woman that I knew personally in a CEO role and sort of, put that C-suite aspiration on the radar for me. In addition to role modeling after, focus in my life, I think I also learned at an early age that I could be creative and make decisions and sort of manifest things on my own accord. And I didn't necessarily need to always, kind of look to external sources for validation. And the way that I got that was actually through a combination of like building up my technology skills at a very early age. I started coding when I was 10. And then also, yeah, that's a whole other story, which I could talk about. It's kind of funny. My dad worked at Hewlett Packard in their heyday. And so, as far as like being, at the forefront of technology. So in the early 1980s, he was a sales guy, and he went out on sales calls with engineers selling medical equipment, and all those sales engineers were telling him, you got to get your daughter started on, computers. And so I was home from school, and he came, from Radio Shack with a TRS-80, which didn't even have a monitor. It sort of looked like, if you remember what, you might remember.
I remember, Anita. I remember.
Yeah. So anyway, technology for me was something I became familiar with and sort of got my first taste of, autonomy and independent thought and creativity there, and analytical thinking as well. But I also, in my education, I just had the benefit of, both my mother and grandmother were teachers. And so in the public school system in Chicago, actually. And so for me, it was also very evident from an early age that, education was, the path. I never wondered, even though I had a very heavily kind of STEM focused education, I never wondered if I belonged there. I had this encouragement at home consistently, that it didn't matter sort of what everyone else in my classes looked like, or, if I felt, sort of that I, was different. The reality is that, the thing that we all had in common was this kind of curiosity and natural kind of affinity for learning. And so that's how I connected with people and related with people. That's how I built relationships, from a very early age. And, actually to this day, a lot of my friendships are still based on, kind of shared interests in that way.
What's so interesting about that, I mean, first of all, everyone seems to be promoting coding and technology for their children at a young age today. But when you were 10, I have to imagine that I don't know if you were labeled as a nerd or anything like that, but that is an unusual thing for you to be doing at 10 years old. And did that ignite sort of, did you love it at that point? Were you hooked from age 10, or was that something that you came back to later?
I absolutely loved it. I think I just at that point did not realize, we didn't have the internet yet, right? So at that point, I didn't realize that, I could have a career based on that. So I it wasn't until someone pointed out to me, I actually started out as a chemical engineering major at first. And some of my classmates noticed that I was spending a lot of time, talking to other university students in the computer lab on campus. And I was also doing a lot of IRC back in the day. I don't know if that's still around anymore, but
I don't even know what it is. What's IRC?
Oh, IRC was Internet Relay Chat. So it was
like it the AOL rooms and like
it was
creepy places.
It was all university students. And it was literally so there were no kind of fancy apps or anything. This is even before kind of AOL. So like basically what would happen is you'd go in the computer lab, you'd sit in front of a screen, there would be nothing but it's a green screen, so it's like all text. And there's just a list of universities. And so you would click on like a school anywhere in the world that had, this connection, and it would take you to sort of their little platform. And then you had to kind of know a few command line prompts and other things that you could do. And then it would put you in this kind of like all text-based app with chat rooms with other students in other countries. And usually they spoke other languages. So I was also into kind of linguistics and other stuff like that. So I was curious about, testing out my language skills with students in other countries. And, and then we would just, of course, like ask the silly questions like, what are your favorite, potato chips or whatever, like, but it was just cool because I could do that. And I don't know, somehow that was just fascinating to me. So it wasn't until my classmates pointed out I was doing a lot of this in my spare time, and that they actually had classes where I could spend all my time on computers if that's what I wanted to do. And I had the courage to to check it out. I took a few coding classes, loved it, and the rest is history.
That is amazing. I do remember those days. I remember them very well when I was in college. It was the first sort of summer computer lab, and it was an AI lab before AI was the thing that it is today. And it was a fascinating space. What I love hearing, in terms of how you talk about it, not just your obvious interest and love of technology and being curious and pursuing it, but also that you never felt like you didn't belong. And that also is, that is a level of confidence and strength that has obviously served you quite well over the course of your career journey. I'm curious as to, you are not just a technology and cloud and security expert, but you are an executive and a leader. So at what point, were there points in time where you realized that, so you had role models with your family, Aunt Carolyn, and when did you understand that leadership was something that you wanted to pursue and that you had that you were good at it?
Ooh, I think, there are probably two answers to that question. I always felt like I was destined for leadership. I mean, I think I'm the classic case of what Sheryl Sandberg described in her Lean In book as, demonstrating executive presence on the playground. I was always trying to sort of, direct people to, better methods of, the jungle gym or playing tag or other things. When I realized that I could, sort of put leadership skills to use, there were probably two phases for that. One was HBS. So when I got into Harvard Business School and sort of, got that validation in some sense, but also, kind of platform, I guess, for, it's really a training ground, and it's a transformational experience because they bring you in, and the purpose, the mission of Harvard is really to, I think it's actually the business school is to educate, leaders that are going to make an impact in the world. And so it's not to create the leaders, but it's actually to educate them. So when they bring you in, they treat you from day one as the protagonist in all of the case studies. And the way we open every single class is, by surmising like what you would personally, or I personally would do if I were in the CEO's shoes, right? And so that was really a way to kind of start to build, a specific kind of, I think, executive leadership skill set. And then the second phase of it was really when, I started leading data organizations. And I did that for the first time at Yahoo while Marissa Mayer was CEO. And I had the chance to kind of see what it was like for a woman to be a tech company CEO, which was a really interesting thing to observe from the inside. And then again, at Amazon, where I worked on Amazon Prime Now, launching and scaling that business, with technology and data. And I had a role model there, Stephanie Landry, who was an amazing, leader and still is, obviously. But it was just a phenomenal kind of opportunity to learn at a really rapid clip rate. And then yet again, once more at Disney, working with several leaders there over the course of my 4 years, where the launch of Disney Plus and the whole digital transformation strategy, it was such a huge tectonic shift in the way that Disney relates to their customers and the way that they think about managing, consequently, the first party data that they're now able to kind of collect, aggregate, and activate to enhance their customer experiences. And so that was all an opportunity to start to kind of and accumulate that executive leadership experience. And honestly, I think it's like anything else. The first time you do it, you have to sort of take it on faith that people are going to understand it's your first time, and in that type of role. And so you are doing your best, and you have what it takes. It's just a matter of learning and having the opportunity to kind of like grow and experiment and figure out what is your style when it comes to communication. How do you manage all of the different priorities? How do you think through the relationships with your peers and building the culture with your team and managing talent and all of the things that go along with that responsibility. It's such an honor to be a leader. And I think one of the things that really stuck with me from going back to the Harvard Business School days was something that I heard from Clay Christensen, who was one of my favorite professors there. And he wrote a book, I think it's called How to Measure a Life. And one of the things that he talks about is how, leaders are so important because, one of the things that they're doing is deciding how people spend their time. And since most people spend the majority of their day working. And so if you are in your leadership position, kind of managing their time, then you're also kind of setting the course for how they're going to develop, what skills they're going to be able to build, what future opportunities, they consequently might have access to. And so that's a really important thing to recognize about, the responsibility of leadership. And so that's when I realized that I loved it, because I realized that it was, my way of being able to contribute to the betterment of others. And that's really important to me.
Well, it makes a lot of sense. And you've also had, not just opportunity, but, the just different companies that you've been at the leadership helm. You're working with the top brands, premier tech companies, also learning from and interacting with giants like Clay Christensen and role models are just, that's just a great perspective, Anita, in terms of what you've both been able to accomplish, as well as sort of of how your ideas have formed about leadership. Now, while you said that you never felt like you didn't belong, at some point, even though you did have many role models, Marissa Mayer and others out there, at some point you had to recognize that you were one of few, and there is a tremendous lack of diversity, both gender as well as racial, ethnic types of diversity in the leadership positions, particularly in technology. So what's the state of play? You're in Silicon Valley now. What are you seeing? There's been a lot of focus in this area. I don't need to tell you the statistics, you know them, but what are you seeing? Are the efforts making a difference? Are we making progress? Are we still a long way away from getting to the level of equity that is needed?
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess I should be clear when I say that I never felt like I didn't belong. It's not because, I wasn't ignoring the reality, which you're, clearly pointing out. And I strongly feel that there's still a lot of opportunity to improve diversity on all sorts of levels, particularly in Silicon Valley, but in technology as an industry overall. It was that I had been kind of taught to transcend that feeling, that initial fear that I think anyone would feel if they walked into a room and realized that they were the only, XYZ there.
Well, I'll just tell you that there are so many women who speak, so clearly about really feeling that imposter syndrome. What I'm hearing you say is that you didn't feel that you were in the as an imposter. You might have been one of few or only, but you didn't feel an imposter. I mean, not to put words in your mouth, but that's how I'm hearing you.
Yeah, I didn't necessarily go into any situation feeling like I didn't belong there from the perspective of, am I worthy? Because it was taught to me from a very early age that it was like literally drilled into my brain every day. Yep. that I am worthy. And I recognize that that's not everyone's experience. I do still have my own struggles, I think, as everyone does, with the notion that, am I good enough? And that's maybe a competitive spiritedness that I carry with me. But I also, when I coach myself and I coach others around, especially women, around the idea that it's possible to transcend it. If you, just anticipate that it's something that you're going to grapple with, and just be aware of it rather than, kind of fight it. And then two, if you recognize that there are other ways to connect with the people who are your peers, because you're in the same room, and so you must be peers, just by the nature of the fact that you have access to, the same opportunities. And so it's really, it's really an opportunity to explore ways that you might not have otherwise thought to explore, how to connect with people. So there's a difference between sort of diversity and inclusion, right? And so I think a culture that is inclusive is really good at making people feel like they belong. And the way to do that is to help people kind of initially build those bridges where they can feel safe enough to be their authentic selves. And then from there, continue to demonstrate that their differences are valued. And that's really how you get into the meat of what makes, for that, often cited research around how diverse teams perform better.
But how do you change the culture? I mean, just having seen it at from a variety of different, very successful companies, being a leader at those successful companies, helping with that success. How do you go about changing the culture? Like what works, what doesn't work from what you've seen and done?
Yeah, I mean, there's a really great example of that. So some of the research that I was just talking about came from another Harvard Business School professor, Frances Fry. She actually went into Uber And, this was around the time that they were having some issues with, Travis Kalanick and
Oh yeah, we know.
yeah, there were a lot of headlines. And so one of her primary goals in her role there was, to look at their culture and try to help improve it. And I think, without going through the entire experience, because I think she wrote a book on it, but without going through the entire experience, what I took away from listening to her talk about it is that there is no concrete, sort of, step one, step two, step three to improve the inclusivity of a culture. It's bespoke to the culture itself. But one of the things that seems to be universal, and this is what, I was saying before in terms of the connections, is that people need to feel safe, and then they need to feel cherished. And you can't feel cherished until you feel safe. But the way that you make people feel safe and cherished is by recognizing the reality that they're grappling with. So it's unique to every organization, because every organization is comprised of people who are dealing with a different context depending on where they're located geographically, what their life experiences demographically, age, race, gender, identity, all of these things play into it. And, you have to understand the dynamics of the organization that you have, and then, recognize kind of where people might be feeling challenged and unsafe, and address it, and be very transparent about doing that, and communicate, that you're intentionally addressing it, so that it's apparent to everyone that it is a priority to make everyone feel safe. And then, going beyond that, where there are opportunities, like a few tactical things that seem to be common that you can do in meetings. And you probably heard about this, I've even done it with colleagues of mine as I've been coming up. We, for example, if there are very few women in a meeting, we might all agree that while we have different ideas, we will help to amplify each other's thoughts, like in the meeting. So, woman A says one point, and then, the conversation moves on without addressing it. And so woman B picks up that point again and says, well, to build on what, woman A said, this is, kind of an interesting thing I think we should explore. And, here are the reasons why, et cetera, et cetera. So like, those are things that I've seen done very effectively. And I think, they can work, but, it's unfair to put the full responsibility for inclusion on the people who feel different or not included, right? Like, it has to be everyone in the organization aware of the fact that inclusion is a priority, and that, it is a priority to make everyone feel safe and included, and actively, take steps. And then you can also, include it in certain things like executive evaluation, performance management and things like that. You can have employees score, the way that they're thinking. I mean, we do this a lot, right? There are all sorts of great place to work surveys, et cetera. Unfortunately, sometimes they're gamed the same way that, NPS surveys are gamed at car dealerships, where they tell you, if you don't give me a 10, it's basically a 0, which is not the right way to do it. But but employee surveys, I think, are also a valuable tool. You can also just look at the patterns in the data and see, people vote with their feet, right? Employees always, especially in these days of virtual workplaces and hybrid work arrangements and remote work arrangements, people can choose to stay or go, and have lots of options and opportunities, especially in tech, to work, in cultures where they feel more included. And that's oftentimes, what they'll vote with their feet and do if the culture is not a good one.
Well, there's so much in what you said, Anita, and just in terms of there's a lot of workforce change going on right now in tech, in every sector, actually. And I also like beyond the notion of feeling safe, the idea of feeling cherished. And then I love the examples that you gave, that amplifying for women in particular, amplifying each other's ideas to be heard in a more known way is an excellent one. And I think, I knew about that tactic. And then it became quite interesting that was an important one to use when we heard about it at the Obama White House, even, with his cabinet. So, okay, one last thing, Anita, I could just talk to you about so many different things. You've got such a great set of experiences. A skill, negotiation. Women, so you've been through a number of leadership positions, rising, and now, on the board of NASDAQ US exchanges. So you know a lot about, what makes companies tick and what makes leaders move up the ranks. But, it's my view when I talk to so many different women that women, and studies confirm this, they still have trouble asking for what they might want. And I assume, based on all that you've done, that you're very good at it. So what are you very good at negotiating? And what advice do you give in that area for other women?
Yes, although I have gotten better at it over time. And I think some of it is just the confidence that comes with experience and repetition. The best advice I can give to younger generations of leaders who are looking to negotiate their way into, a better role or, whatever it might be, is to see, the big picture rather than just, the kind of the negotiation as a transaction, meaning there's a person on the other side of the table. They have wants and needs just like you do. So, think about it from the perspective of what it is they're trying to accomplish. And so, for an example, I will quickly say that if you are negotiating for a, promotion, think about what it takes for your manager to look good and how you contribute to that and what you can do to align both of your interests in order to kind of move forward together, rather than it being, something that you want from them and that, something that they need from you. It doesn't have to be, a negotiation doesn't have to be between opposing parties. Oftentimes it can be, more of a collaborative conversation of like, how do we increase, the size of the pie? How do we make the table bigger? Right? That's really what it is.
Such great advice, and also how to help the person who can give you whatever it is you're asking for, how to help them say yes. All right, Anita, this has been such a terrific conversation. I so appreciate you sharing all of this wisdom and advice as we close out on Inspiring Women. Any last closing advice for other younger aspiring women out there?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think, we talked very briefly about the number of women in the marketplace, kind of downshifting from leadership or from the workforce altogether over the last few years as a result of all the different effects of COVID and other things, lack of childcare. I mean, I think I would love to just, briefly take a moment and encourage women to think about their decisions as being like a series of things that they can optimize over time. You may not be able to have it all at once, but if you think about making decisions and sequentially as opposed to over time, there may be other things you can do to optimize and prepare to get back into the workforce or to stay in touch with what's happening in the market, what's happening in your field, what's happening with your skills. Maybe take some opportunity to like upskill. Just, I guess, don't give up is ultimately what I'm trying to say. I think there are a lot of ways that we can support each other as a community just by recognizing and showing empathy, for others' situations and just being honest and authentic about it, talking about it, I think, and not being afraid to ask for help when you're making a big decision, I think is also another key point. And so we're a community and we have to continue to be that for each other.
Well, such great advice. I so appreciate you sharing your wisdom for others. This has been an excellent Inspiring Women conversation. I have been speaking with Anita Lynch, and Anita, thank you so much.
Thank you.
This has been an episode of Inspiring Women with Laurie McGraw. Please subscribe, rate, and review. We are produced by Kate Cruz at Executive Podcast Solutions. More episodes can be found on inspiringwomen.show.
I am Laurie McGraw, and thank you for listening.